For those of you just signing on, we had a travel log of a trip I took to Israel back in May. I'll just quickly recap that. Back in May, I finally made a trip I've been wanting to do for about 5 years, and things got in the way, such as COVID in 2020, and then other things happened, and then this war broke out, and looked like it was going to be hard to get in. Next slide, please. But there was a window of opportunity, and I always thought, next slide, that this is going to be the best time to go to Israel, or it's the worst of times to go to Israel. And I was fully expecting this war to happen with Iran, and I expected it to happen. I just did not really want to be there when it happened. So thankfully, I was able to get back 4 weeks before the fireworks really started, even though there was a lot of damage in Israel. So that would not have been a good time to have been there. The missile strike, which we'll cover, I think I'll come up to a little later. I was in Tel Aviv when a missile landed near the airport, 300 yards or meters from the airport. And I think there's some slides coming up of that. We met our group. I was there 4 days ahead of time, and then my group came in, and we stayed the first night on the beach at Herod's Hotel. I thought it was interesting. Herod was a person that was hated by the Jews in at the time of Yeshua. Remember, he tried to kill every baby to make sure he didn't get born. And he was an awful man. He hated his own people. His own people wanted to kill him, his own family, because he was such a murderer. But he was a brilliant but designer. He had a great vision for this country. He wanted it to be basically a trophy of Roman engineering. And even the people from Rome, when they came to visit, were like blown away with what he had accomplished in Israel during the times that he was there, which is, I think, about 30, maybe 40 years. He was always on the run because they were trying to kill him. He thought they were trying to kill him. He was paranoid, but they were trying to kill him. He killed his own sons. He killed his own wives. Nasty guy. Now they have a hotel named after him. But he left a stamp, and most of the things, next slide, that we think about of Israel is the imprint of their most hated king they had, who was Edomian, which he was from the Esau, a little bit of Jewish mixed in there. But he got in the good graces with his college buddies and in Rome and was able to become the king of Judea. Next slide. Some of the hotels are beautiful over there. It's not a third world country. There are some third world aspects. But, okay. And so we spent the night there, and the next day we got on the bus and began our tour. Next slide. Is the coastline. Coastline is beautiful there at Tel Aviv. The whole Mediterranean coast is beautiful, and this was certainly no exception. I actually went into the water. I finally couldn't take it anymore, and it was hot, so I went body surfing there in Tel Aviv. Finally figured out how to do it. Took enough time. All right, and so we're going through Tel Aviv. There's going to be some pictures coming up once we get everything queued up of the harbor. We can just look at it like that if it's not going to load up. There we go. And we're taking this from the iCloud. We finally figured out the technology, here we go, that was necessary to, oh, beautiful, that's great. So this is a port, you can see, marina, and that's a causeway, breakwater, jetty out there, and you can see the modern skyline of Tel Aviv. Looking towards Jaffa, that promontory off to the right, way up there is Jaffa, where I took a bunch of pictures that I showed in the Bible study earlier today. Next. Sailboat coming into the harbor, beautiful scene. Next. We're going, the view of, that's where I went body surfing, as a matter of fact. Next slide. Next, that's the hotel. Well, this is taken from the hotel the next day, looking towards the marina and the pool over there. Next slide. Now, our first stop was a place called Ayalon Institute. Don't think of institute, think of it as a museum, Ayalon Museum. I'd never heard of it before. Next slide. But it was a secret, clandestine, black market, you might say, ammunition manufacturing plant underground, hidden from view, from the Brits. Remember, in 1970, General Allenby crossed the bridge over into Israel, Palestine, they called it at that time, with the Palestinian Mandate, the British Mandate for Palestine. So because of World War II, the Ottoman Turks bet on the wrong side, and when they were losing, they lost a lot of land during the war, World War I, and then they lost the war, so the Ottoman Empire was abolished by 1918. And now it fell into the hands of England, Great Britain, to run Palestine. And my father was there in 1942. In July, he flew in on the first American plane in the Middle East for the North African campaign. They fought with General Montgomery. So he spent 2 or 3 months in Israel or Palestine, exactly 30 years before I was there during the Big Dig, along with Dave Haber, and Ken Trabig, and Clyde Kylo, and Stan McNeil, some other luminaries you might recall. Well, this particular place, to give you a little bit of back history, in 1945, after World War II, there was finally, if there was anything good that happened out of the Holocaust, or as the Jewish people call it, the Shoah, was that they have to have their own land. We just can't go through another Holocaust and lose 6 million plus people. They're going to exterminate us if we can't control our future. Our people need a land. Eretz Israel is where it needs to be. And they became independent in 1948. United Nations recognized them as a separate state. America was the first place to recognize them, their independence. Truman very boldly stepped right up and says, we recognize Israel as an independent state. Well, from 1945 to 48, the Brits were still there, and the Zionists were growing in strength. They were still coming in. People came in that survived the Holocaust. So there was a lot of immigration, and they were determined to win their independence, even if they had to fight the Brits, which they did. Basically, they skirmished and insurgencies against the Brits and blew up part of the King David Hotel, killing hundreds of people. So it was a bloody time, but what they decided they needed to do was, as soon as they got independent, they were going to have war with the Arabs. They kind of knew that was happening. They needed to get ready. How they got ready? Making bullets, 9mm bullets. And there were about 4 factories scattered over Israel that never got detected because they hid them underground. And we're going to see later on a diagram of this. So this was a kibbutz. Technically, it was a kibbutz. But they didn't do a lot of foreign production there. The real reason to be there was happening underground, like about 40 feet underground, hidden away in this secret factory. They disguised it as 2 things. One part of the building was a laundromat, a commercial laundromat. That's a commercial washing machine for clothes. And they would, for big things. And you notice it's at an angle. It was covering the manhole to go down to the factory. There was a ladder. Now there's a stairway as a museum. But they would climb a ladder down into the basement, and that's when they would make their bullets. And then when it was time to change shifts, they rotated that washing machine over here, exposing the hole, and they got out. Nobody ever suspected it. British soldiers came in to drop off their laundry, which they weren't supposed to do, but they did anyway. And they'd wash their clothes for them right over the hole that they were trying to. They were trying to keep the Israelites from arming themselves, but it didn't work. During this 3-year period, they made 2.25 million 9mm shells, either 10 centimeters or the 19mm ones they use in the Uzi machine guns, which came a little bit later. So they made shorts and longs. We'll get to it. Next slide. So one part was the washing machine. The other part of the building was a bakery. Go back to the other one. I'll go back to right there. That's where they baked the bread. So they made bread. And that one had I'm not sure exactly how they exposed the entrance, but it was hiding somewhere underneath that. And then they would walk down and work 10-hour shifts. Next slide. Now they built, since it's now a museum, they built this winding staircase for us tourists that don't particularly like climbing ladders, for good reason. Next slide. This is, it wasn't a very big building. That's about the length and the breadth of it. And machines, next slide, they bought some used, worn-out machines from Czechoslovakia that they were able to retrofit to make it work. Keep going. Next slide. And that's motors turning all the machines happening around there. The lady in red is our tour guide. Next slide. There's the bullet casings right there. You can see different lengths of 9 millimeters. That was the standard they did for pretty much all of their small guns and machine guns were 9 millimeters. Next. 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 And that's an example. They would empty into this bucket when they would come out of that pressing machine. Next. Now, this is interesting for any of you knowing much about firearms. This was the test range. They tested random samples of bullets to make sure they had enough firepower that they weren't going to jam. One thing you don't want in a firefight is a submachine gun that jams on you. So you have enough power to get the bullet out and to eject the old cartridge and reload the next one with a gas-powered mechanism. So they had to test to make sure there was enough powder in it to create the explosion to work reliably. Here's what they would do. From this end, they would shoot the gun through these symmetrical discs that are calibrated with 360 degrees marked off on it. And over the time from the first disc to the second disc, there's a certain amount of lag time. There's a muzzle velocity as the bullet's going through. When it hits the second revolving cylinder or wheel, it's going to be slightly off, right? Because there's a little bit of time. So the thing was spinning very, very quickly. Okay, it was really spinning. And then they could measure the distance between the first one and the second one and determine from that the relative power and strength of the bullets. That's how they did it. Next slide. You'll see this in a diagram right here, where here would be the entry point, I think, for right here. And then over here you can see it's delayed or advanced more, so that the amount of if you're Don and Don Bjorker and Joe Lingo, you got timing, kind of like timing on the old cars, right? There's a little bit of delay, and that's what we're talking about here. Next slide. They would do this when the train came by. This was right next to a train track. The Turks built a train track to go from northern Israel down towards Egypt. And I mentioned last time how when they got to Israel, there were 30,000 trees. And the reason there were so few trees, the last of them the Turks got to build the railroad ties. Okay, if there were any trees big enough, they used them. But when the Turks decided to tax the people there in Palestine, they decided to tax them on assets that couldn't be hidden, trees. If you had a tree in your backyard, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 trees, okay, you owe us 50 shekels, 10 shekels per tree, whatever it was. So what do you think the natives did to the trees? They cut them down. Cut them down because they didn't like paying taxes. So by the time Mark Twain got there, the place was desolate, just a horrible place. It was either desert, dry, nothing there, nothing living, or swamps with malaria-infested mosquitoes. It was a horrible place. He was so disgusted with it. And when my dad got there in 1942, it was about the same situation. Hardly any trees, but now there's almost 1/3 trees planted all over the place. Next slide. This was where because they were underground all the time, they didn't get natural sunlight, so they had these sunning tan things so they wouldn't look so pale and get some of that vitamin D going, I guess. Next slide. And, some of the ones they smuggled out to get it to wherever the depot was, this, I think, was a milk truck, and in the back they had a secret compartment, and they would put boxes of these bullets and take them to their depots where they stored them because they knew they would need them the day the war broke out in 1948, and that's exactly what happened. 1948, when they declared independence, the Arab nations went to war against them, and all they had was machine gun. They didn't have a lot of firepower, but they had these bullets they'd been making for 3 years. Thankfully, they had that. They couldn't have won the war. They really didn't have much. They weren't equipped like they are today. Next slide. Now, what's interesting about this is I think this is where they would press the bullet down, and they would put, by hand, they would put the powder in the shell. This was not an automated process. They literally would measure it in little tiny dippers and put it through a funnel down into the brass casing. Next slide. You can see them down there, the ones that are completed. Pictures of ladies actually doing this. It got hot down there. Next slide. So a lot of them were. Okay, this is an overview. This is the top. And so they, in a record time, like in a couple, 3 weeks, they dug this big hole, said they were going to store vegetables down there, and never did. And then they quickly put walls around it, cemented it up, and built it as fast as they could before the Brits knew what they were really going to do with it. And they decided, well, we changed our mind what we're going to do with it. And we put in a bakery and a washing mat. So down here is where the factory workers were. And there were 2 entrances here through this shaft up to the washing area. And this was the baking area. It looks like it was behind, like maybe I don't know how you could slide an oven like that, but they went up this direction. So they'd go down one way and come up the other way. And they never got caught. Never got caught. Next slide. That was our first tour as we watched this for about an hour. It was really fascinating. Next slide. And there is again, the ovens, and I'm not exactly sure how they didn't show how that was open. Next slide. Next slide. Outside the kibbutz. Next. And now the tour really begins of the archaeology of the ancient times. This is Caesarea Maritima. It was a city built by King Herod the Great, as they called him. And he had his capital here at this area called Caesarea Maritima. And the palace was over here, and then over close to the water was where his royal residence was. Now, Dave and I were there in 1972, and Mr. Avery, I don't remember anything about all of this archaeology we're going to see, with the exception of the aqueduct that brought the water in from like 20, 30 miles away from the hills. They brought in water. You'll see that later. That was on the end of the tour. That's all I remember. But they've excavated so much today. Next slide. So this is where the palace would have been. And in this area here, government headquarters and things like that. And out here, we'll see where Herod actually, his house was. Next slide. Next. More of the palaces that's been somewhat restored. Next slide. Now, one of the things the Romans did, and one thing I noticed during this trip was that the Romans lived so much differently than the Hebrews and than the Jews. They always had certain things to make them feel comfortable, even away from Rome. They duplicated everything they could imagine. Next slide. And one of those was the theater. There's a nuclear plant, I think, back here. Those are either nuclear power generating plants or it's a coal plant, one or the other. Next. The beach is just beautiful there. This is called Caesarea National Park. Next slide. And here we are at the theater. This is the amphitheater. This is where they performed plays. They were in love with the Greek plays and did them all the time. And King Herod would come out and watch them. These things could hold 3,000 people. Next slide. But it's not the only one in the country. There were probably 3 or 4 of these things, different sizes and scales depending on the population. But just look how large these things were. And this much of it is still preserved. Some of that might have been rebuilt. I'm not exactly sure, but I don't remember seeing any of this when we were there 53 years ago. That's our guide here. Roman is his name. He's actually from Russia. I see this place right here. That's where King would sit. Either King Herod or King Agrippa later on. Next slide. That's where he would sit, right there in the middle. Next. And they were very large people, both of them were. Next slide. It's hard to really get a grasp of how magnificent, grand these things were when you look at what they are today. But that's 2,000 years of wear and tear, and they still are impressive. But back in the day, it would have been absolutely spectacular. You can see the intricacy on the capitals up here. Next slide. Next. Just so much intricate work. How they moved these things around and carved them. I mean, the amount of manpower it took just to do that is incomprehensible when today everything has to be done fast and quick and cheap. Next slide. Nothing was cheap about that. One of the things he did, he was hated by the people for oppressing the people, but he put everybody to work. There was not much unemployment. And he taxed them 90%. And they weren't complaining because they were making money. They made enough money, they had a good lifestyle. That wasn't their biggest concern. This is what the theater would look like. See how much different? I mean, it almost looks like the Globe Theater in London. But this is the backdrop where you could have this 3 stories, and you could put different murals up there or curtains and things, and you can see how high it was at that time. Next slide. We'll see another set of these when we get to Bayat Xi'an later on. It was another city in the Decapolis, one of the 10 cities the Romans had built. The Romans lived with Romans. The Jews lived with Jews. They weren't integrated societies. The Jews had their mikvahs, or ritual cleansing, baptism-type pools all over the place, and especially in Jerusalem at the temple area. And the Romans had their Roman baths. Next slide. And they had their theater, and they had their hippodromes. Next slide. Next. Next. I forgot what that says, but can't read it from here. Next. Again, looking south towards Tel Aviv. Next. This is north of Tel Aviv, about, 50 miles, I would think, 40, 50 miles. And I think this is a place, or close to it, where the Rabbi Shaul, Apostle Paul, was put in the dungeon for almost 2 years, 2 or 3 years, where he was waiting to get shipped off to Rome to go see. Remember, he said, I appeal to Caesar, because he was a Roman citizen, he had that right. And he was down in one of these places. They found the place where Paul actually was imprisoned. Next. And he wrote several of his prison epistles, either from Rome or from right here in Caesarea. Next slide. I can't remember exactly where it was, but it was in this. It might have been right down in there. But next slide. And you can see here, this was the royal palace. The residence was right here close to the breaking water. And unfortunately, it all pretty much fell apart because it was built on sand. You remember the parables about building your house on sand. Well, unfortunately, they built it on sand. It did not survive. The actual port itself fell apart because of that. This was the largest port in the world, in the modern world, was here at Caesarea. Herod didn't do anything second rate. He did it first class all the way. But that's all that's left of his royal residence. Next slide. Next, just more ruins. And we're going to get to something more, one more slide, kind of interesting. Okay, there we go. This tells you what's going on. Oh, more of these mosaics telling you it was very wealthy. A lot of money was spent on it. And this is the floor plan of what it looked like. Next slide. Lower palace, this is where the lower palace was, which would have been where he would have hung out and they would have had his Roman baths and all of that. Next slide. Beautiful beach. Next. Okay, now we're going from the palace, we're going to the hippodrome to watch the chariot races. Remember Ben-Hur? Well, this is what's going on over here. But what's going on right here? This is our tour guide being funny. Well, on the way, if you go to the theater, hey, it's now time for the chariot races. You go right up north and you stop here at the latrine and you take care of your business. Yes. They weren't concerned about privacy. It wasn't the privy over there. It was the publicy. And they would just sit there next to each other, and there's running water all this water from the aqueduct would flush things away, which I'm assuming went right out to the ocean, right? Because I don't think they had sewage treatment plants in those days. So, Herod's downstream of that. Next slide. You can see a better view of that here. So how would you like that? But very convenient right along the way. I don't know if they had a men's side or women's side. I don't know if they really cared. Next slide. And there's another guy being funny over there. He's had to try it out. I did not try it out, in case you're wondering. Next slide. Yeah. No pun intended. Next slide. And this is the hippodrome. So you would do your racing, or make the corner here and run down that way, back and forth, and just look at the amount of stands. Thousands of people could watch these races. Next. Next. That's how the Romans kept everybody pacified. They gave them chariot races, and they gave them those gladiator spectacles, just to keep everybody busy and not talking about politics. Turn the page. I can't remember exactly when I took a picture of that. This is the aqueduct. This is what I remember from, only thing I remember from the trip before was the aqueduct. So the water would come down from the top, and then it would just, they would measure things so it would all be running downhill. It worked very, very well. They built these all over Europe, over Italy and Spain and France. Everybody had these aqueducts to move water around. Next slide. Another picture of the same thing. 2,000 years, still stands. And, well, our bridges last 200 years without major retrofits. Got steel in it, starts to rust, poof, pops it out. Next slide. Along the way, we're now up into the Galilee, going to the Galilee area. We saw a lot of banana plantations, and they have these nets around them, and I think that was to keep the birds out of them. Next slide. But lots of bananas. The things we saw the most are banana plantations, palms that they would use for making, palm dates, things like that, and hay, and olive trees and grapes. Those are the main things we see. So they bale hay kind of like we do here in Texas. Next slide. We're climbing up towards the hill country. This is olives. We saw lots of olive trees just all over the place. They're a major exporter of olive oil. Next. On some cities along the way, and after a while, I couldn't tell you which one was Jewish, which was Arab. Next slide. In a way, you really couldn't tell because both of them are very prosperous. If you listen to the liberal media today, they think all the Palestinians are living in squalor and in garbage dumps. But no, if you behave yourself and you're an Arab citizen, you can live in northern Israel. They tend to live in their towns, and then the Jews live in theirs, and maybe right across the road from each other. But sometimes they live in the same town. But most of the time, and you look at one, they're both prosperous. So not all the Arabs are impoverished. A lot of them are very wealthy businessmen and have houses with 4, 5, 6 stories. Next slide. This is what like I mentioned now, there's forests. I think those are maybe eucalyptus trees or maybe some pine trees around here. Keep going. Next. Just a glimpse of the beauty of the area. Once you have water and irrigation, then you can grow things. Next. That was a ranch. I kept trying to find pictures of cows, but they moved too fast. Hay production. Next slide, please. And the trees. Beautiful forest. Next. And next. Now we are at Tel Megiddo National Park. Tel Megiddo, Tel means hill. Basically, Tel is a hill created by civilizations upon civilizations building on the destruction of the previous one. They just built on top, so they get taller and taller and taller. Tel Megiddo is one of those. It's a hill that just pops out of the Jezreel Valley. We read in the prophecy about the valley of Jezreel and the battle at Armageddon, which stands for Har Megiddo or Megiddo. Har means mountain, H-A-R. So Har Megiddo, take out the H, that's Armageddon. That's where this is coming from. So it had a promontory point, a position overlooking the Jezreel Valley of below Megiddo or Megiddon. Next slide. Now, Dave and I went there on our tour in 72, And all I remember was climbing up this hill and looking out over the valley and seeing how lush it was, which it is to this very day. That part hasn't changed much. But the excavation that they've done at Tel Megiddo for the next, well, it didn't take 53 years, but since then has been remarkable. This is our tour guide here, Roman, and this is Mark Biltz. He wrote a book called about the blood moons. He keeps writing books. Next slide. He was the, you might say, the executive sponsor of this. Roman's explaining the strategic importance of Israel. Why was Megiddo so important? They say there's been more battles fought on that field than any other place on earth. And there's been more battles for a city in Jerusalem than any other city on earth. Somebody might contest that, but that's what he was telling us. The reason is, if you have your caravan routes, you could come up through the Red Sea here and then offload your ships, and then to get things into Greece and Syria and places like that, you put them on camels and go up either the way of the Philistines along the coast, or you go up through this direction. But either way, you end up in the Jezreel Valley. You go right around Megiddo. So they were there as trolls to take their taxes. And many of the armies that conquered the area didn't even bother with Megiddo because it seemed so impregnable. Finally, Solomon finally took it down. But even David didn't take it down. Next slide. Here we go. Let's see if I can remember exactly where. This is, I think this is Haifa. It's kind of hard to tell from an angle like this. But they came right through this rate to go to Babylon. You would come up through here. You couldn't go across the desert. It was impassable. No water. And come across this way to go to Babylon. And that's why this area was at the crossroads. And that's why Israel was in a predicament all the time, was foreign nations would come through from Egypt going to Babylon. They went right through that area. So one way or the other, there were going to be armies on that area. And the only way they could survive was being close to God and have his protection. But when they started worshiping the other gods and the idols and the pagans, then they were open. And then things happened to them. We know northern Israel was taken into Assyria, and then in 538 BC, of course, the Babylonians came and took Jerusalem and ransacked the temple and hauled everything off to Babylon, which again is off this way. How much they took? The Bible even talks a bit about some of the things, but not all of the things were listed in the inventory. When Alexander the Great ransacked Persepolis in Persia, it took 3,000 camels to haul off the gold and silver. 3,000 camels. Next slide. That's why Megiddo was such a strategic place. I forgot the kind of tree this is, but it was interesting. Next slide. There's so much stuff. I thought I was going to write all this down, but then as I was trying to write things down, then he'd be talking again, and I don't want to miss anything. So there's so much information that I just couldn't absorb. It was such a dense educational experience. So talks about how Megiddo became Armageddon, and I just explained that. Next slide. Now, this is Megiddo again. What's interesting about this is that when they built the city, the spring, the well, was outside the city walls of Megiddo. Well, you have to have water, and with water and being such a steep hill, they were able to fend off all kinds of armies, like I mentioned, for years. But they had to find a way to get down to the water without having to go outside the gate and being captured by the enemy. So what they did is they built a shaft down through the bedrock, like about 70, 80 feet, I believe. A big old shaft. Next slide. And then built a tunnel that would go to the well. And then they disguised the entrance to it around the wall outside, and no longer did you have to go outside the wall to get your water. Your strong women carrying those pots could go down and haul that water up. Let's keep going here. I'll show you. Next slide. Oh, yeah, here. This is still part of Megiddo top. There was a city on top. And here is the original construction. Everything above this wood beam is reconstruction. They took the beams, took the rocks that fell off, and rebuilt them. Next slide. You can see this all the way around here, the original line of the buildings. Next slide. I can't tell you exactly what that was. Just too much information all at once. Next slide. Next. Those were, go back to that. Most of the stones in Israel are limestone. Limestone, that's why you see it's really white, beigey looking things most of the time. But up in this area, in the northern Galilee, they have basalt. Notice how darker this is. It has that octagon or hexagon shaped shafts. If you go out to eastern Washington, where I used to live in Washington, you see a lot of these things, just amazing how straight they were. Next slide. That's volcanic. That's from volcanic activity. This area is on a geological fault, the Great Rift Valley of Africa, that runs right up through the Serengeti, for example, and goes up right through the Red Sea, right through Jerusalem, is on a fault line. And so there was a lot of tectonic activity over the years. There's been some great, even the Bible talks about some of the earthquakes that destroyed a lot of things in Israel. So you have volcanic activity in places. Next line. So you'll see sometimes a combination of both the dark basaltic and the white limestone. This is the palace on top of Megiddo. I'm not sure if that was, next slide, Hebraic or Roman. I think this is Hebrew. This looks like David's seal here. Next slide. And next slide. Okay, this is what I was talking about. Look how lush this is. It looked this way when we were there in 72. Just flat and fertile, vegetables, everything you could imagine growing in trees and nurseries, just gorgeous. So this is the place where the end time battle is supposed to happen, and the place will be a bloody bloodbath. Next line, please. I think that's Mount Tabor. I believe that's Mount Tabor. Next slide. Kind of going around top. Up here, I think, is where Nazareth is up here. And Cana, I think, is over here, or it looks something like that. It's hard to remember exactly. But this is across the valley of Jezreel, and Nazareth was on the other side of this valley. Next slide. Israeli side, and I'm not sure what the other one is. Looks like it's a park sign. Next slide. And now that was looking over into the area of the Golden Heights, into either Syria or Jordan. The Assyrian, so it was an Assyrian city at one time. Next slide. So it passes from one to the other. Now we're back to the well. This is how you get down to the well. Next. As you go down stairways and more stairways. That's probably more than 80 feet. Next slide. And then you go down more stairways. This is the shaft, just to get down to the tunnel. Look how big that is. And back then, they didn't have these nice stairs. Next slide. It was chiseled into the sides of the wall itself, which meant I'm sure there were no OSHA-approved handrails in this place. The building engineers weren't around. If you fell over, you fell over, You hit the water right, maybe you survive, maybe you don't. But this is how you get down, and this is that's more stairways. Next slide. And they did this with, hand tools. They didn't have any jackhammers. But look how well it was constructed. Now we're on the tunnel to get out to the well and go down some more steps. Next slide. And this is just a water that's at the bottom of the shaft. It's not the water you're after, but they had a lot of rain, so it filled up. Next slide. And down more stairs. Next. And again, they weren't that nice 2,000 years ago. Next slide. Maybe we're going too fast. Keep going. I think we're pulling these things off of the iCloud, so there could be some bandwidth issues. Okay, I can see a lot of stairs. Imagine coming up with one of those big old pots, and you're a woman. I don't know if they put backpacks on or slings. Next slide. And next slide until we finally get, oh, now we're coming out. Okay, go back just a little bit. I don't remember seeing. Okay, that must be where the water was. And then, next slide. And then this is our exit. We came out a different way, outside the city walls. And we came around to the bus stop here. But this is, again, more stairs. So when you're going into Israel in the hill country, you do a lot of stair climbing. Next slide. Anybody want to go back and live in the good old days? Every day, chop wood, haul water. That's the walls. Next, I'm sure it looked better back in the day when they were fortified. Most of the cities back in those ancient days, they had walls around them to keep out the robbers and thieves and the marauders, because it was not safe being out in the country, especially at night. That's why they traveled in huge caravans of hundreds of camels. So they had their own little private army security force. If you were by yourself, you probably wouldn't make it. You'd get jumped and killed and robbed. Next slide. They made cement out of that limestone. Next slide. Just thought I'd show that one. They grind up the stones and make cement. Next. Now we're getting close to Galilee. Next. Could you throw up that map picture, Michael? And give you a little perspective of where we have been. So here's Israel. We flew into Tel Aviv, which is over here, Tel Aviv, Jaffa. We went up the coast to Caesarea, which I think is somewhere around here. And we didn't go to Haifa. We turned in this direction. We're going south of Nablus, or Nazareth, into I think that's the Sea of Galilee right there, I believe. It's kind of hard to see from this angle. Does that look like the Sea of Galilee? I think so. And that's Nazareth. So we're up in this part of the world right now. We're going to go around this way and come down to the Dead Sea, probably not today. Definitely not today, because it's time to stop. We'll pick this up. I may be coming back during the Feast of Tabernacles. I think I'm going to be local. And if you like, we can do another slideshow at that point. And that takes us up to day 2 of our tour.